a minute because we have to wait right till at 6:30. I can't start the meeting before the posted time, so let me just give it another minute.
Shireen, I'm jealous. I want some sort of background for me because I have the worst rooms in my house to have some sort of backdrop.
We have a very great IT department that put together all these nice little backdrops for us. So yeah, it hides my horrible studio office I have with, you know, it just.
Yeah, I won't even tell you what's behind me, Scott.
So everybody, before we start, let me ask, it'll make it easier for me as I'm monitoring the screen here, for anybody who is not on the Monomoy School Committee, the Chatham Select Board, or the Harwich Board of Selectmen, if you could turn your cameras off, that way it shifts everybody and I can see who I need to be seeing this evening. I believe that will do the trick. All right. Thank you. Hopefully that will settle down and I'll be able to see everybody I need to see. Okay. So it is now 6:30 and I do believe I see everybody that is supposed to be here this evening. So I'm Tina Games, Chair of the Monomoy Regional School Committee. I am going to call this joint meeting between the Monomoy Regional School Committee, the Chatham Select Board, and the Harwich Board of Selectmen to order. And it's at 6:31 p.m. and we will all of our boards need to call ourselves to order through a roll call. So I'm going to start with Monomoy and then we'll move over to Chatham to call their board to order and then to Harwich to call their board to order. So let's start with Monomoy. And I'm just going to say your first name. So if you'll say your full name and present, that would be great. And I think we are recording. Is that correct? Yes. All right. So let's start. Joanne.
Joanne Sheehan, present.
Thank you. Jackie.
Jacqueline Zebrat Long, present.
Thank you. Terry.
Terry Russell, present.
Thank you. Joe.
Joseph Osceola, present.
Thank you. Sharon.
Sharon Stout, present.
Thank you. Nancy.
Nancy Scott, present.
Thank you. Meredith.
Meredith Henderson, present.
Thank you. And Tina Games, present. Shireen, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tina. So I'll take a roll of the Chatham Select Board, starting with Board Member Kokolas.
Peter Kokolas, present.
Board Member Metters.
Corey Metters, present.
Board Member Nicastro.
Dean Nicastro, present.
Board Member Dykins.
Jeff Dykins, present.
And the Chair, Shireen Davis, is present.
Thank you. Larry, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Tina. I'll call the meeting to order for the Harwich Board of Selectmen with a roll call. Don.
Don Howell, present.
Michael.
Michael McCaskill, present.
Ed. You're muted, Ed.
Ed McManus, present.
Larry Ballantyne, present.
Thank you. Now I want to welcome everyone officially to our joint meeting. And again, this is the Monomoy Regional School Committee joint meeting with the Chatham Select Board and the Harwich Board of Selectmen to discuss financial inequities in the regional agreement. And I just want to share for the viewing audience, for the public, that the purpose of this joint meeting, the Monomoy Regional School Committee did discuss the regional inequities, and we had a motion made, I guess at our last meeting, and I'm going to read the motion, which was unanimous, and therefore we moved ahead to call the joint meeting with both of the boards. And the motion reads as follows. The Monomoy Regional School Committee recognizes there is a financial inequity in funding the elementary schools. We recommend a joint meeting to review and resolve that equity or inequity. So that was the motion made. It was unanimous. Therefore, we called the three boards together, which is our intention this evening. And we're going to move into discussion items. The first item under discussion is disparity in elementary per pupil spending and the effect on financial inequity. And I'm going to turn this over to our superintendent, Scott Carpenter, and our business manager, Michael McMillan, to walk us through the slideshow and to kind of bring us to where we are right now and why we're here. So Scott and Michael.
Thank you, Tina. I will share my screen and project the slides. I am aware that both boards of selectmen have heard me go through many of these slides, so I will try to go through them quickly, but I just want to be sensitive that we might have some individuals that are from the public that are seeing this for the first time. So I want to at least have enough context so they understand the conversation that we're having. So with that, can everyone see the slides?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, so as Tina had mentioned, there is a growing fiscal inequity that I don't think anyone really foresaw a decade ago as we were coming together. But even a decade ago, there were some indications that there were going to be some challenges to be had for us in this region, and we're seeing a gradual decline of school-age children across the Cape. It's not just happening in Harwich and Chatham; it's happening in every Cape town. And we're seeing fewer families with school-age children. A lot of this is tied to affordable housing, cost of living, childcare. The Cape being a retirement destination, growth of sort of the Airbnb type of businesses that may sort of snap up houses that previously younger families might have purchased for their starter homes. But what we're seeing is this attrition of school-age families, or families with school-age children, but some communities are getting impacted more than others. Chatham, relative to Harwich, is seeing a much more rapid decline of young families. If we were in our other two adjacent communities, Dennis is seeing a more rapid decline relative to Yarmouth. Orleans is seeing a more rapid decline relative to Brewster. So yes, our adjacent communities are seeing similar types of challenges as well. So over the past decade, since we've regionalized, when we started back in FY12, Chatham and Harwich were still fiscally operating their school systems separately. Harwich Elementary had 6 sections of children per grade level in their building. So think of it as 6 sections of kindergarten, and had an enrollment of 579 students. Chatham Elementary had 3 sections per grade level with an enrollment of 279. There was a significant number of the Chatham children, 53 of them were from Harwich. School choice from Chatham to Harwich was significantly less. There were only 6 of the Harwich enrollment that came from Chatham. As we jump forward here to the present year, FY21, and we look at what the numbers would have been prior to the start of this year, what we were seeing coming at us. COVID has created a situation where we have some students that are homeschooling, some students that are opting for distance learning, and some in our building. So COVID has kind of thrown off the numbers, but we knew what the numbers were going to be going into the school year. We would have seen pre-COVID 512 students going into Harwich Elementary, including 10 from Chatham, but still that's a significant drop off from, from FY12. It's 12% drop in enrollment. Chatham, we would have seen only 170 students, including 24 from Harwich. But again, a pretty pronounced drop since FY12, losing 39% of the school's enrollment. The challenge that we have as we see enrollment declines, particularly this differential in enrollment declines, is that it's creating two dilemmas that are interconnected. One is that it's creating a rapid increase in the per pupil spending, particularly at Chatham Elementary, and that per pupil is significantly higher than what's happening at Harwich Elementary. And again, it's an economy of scales issue. As if you've got a school that's operating with 5 classrooms per grade level versus a school that only has 1 classroom per grade level, the economies of scale are very different in terms of running the building, where the smaller school is more expensive per student to run. The other challenge we have as Chatham Elementary is rapidly heading towards having only 1 class per grade level is it potentially compromises our ability to provide both students and teachers a rich environment to go and learn and to teach in. So if we look at the per pupil differences, if back in FY12, the per pupil difference between the 2 elementary schools was $941. And the per pupil difference by FY21 with what the budget would have been if we were fully operating Chatham Elementary as we had intended going into the school year, Chatham Elementary's per pupil expenditure would have been $16,879. The Harwich Elementary per pupil expenditure, $11,885, creating a $4,994 per pupil difference between the two cost of educating students between the 2 elementary schools. If we project forward, by FY25, we would anticipate that Chatham Elementary is going to have 1 classroom per grade level, with a school operating with 1 classroom per grade level, with the other factors sort of scaled forward, and Harwich Elementary declining to have only 5 classrooms per grade level. We'd anticipate the per pupil expenditures at Chatham Elementary School are going to be over $26,000 per student. Harwich Elementary over $13,000, and the difference between the per pupil spending is going to be in that over $12,000 per pupil range in terms of difference per pupil to educate them. And the one thing that I've tried to really emphasize throughout this, the inequity here is not that we're doing something better at Chatham Elementary. We're offering the same program, the same curriculum, the same opportunities for the students at both elementary schools. The challenge, the challenge here is really how our regional agreement apportions the operating expenses for the 2 elementary schools. So, so our regional agreement takes costs above and beyond minimum required contribution and apportions it based on a 3-year rolling average of foundation enrollment. And it's just straightforward that way. It doesn't look any deeper than that in terms of how it apportions costs. So the way that's playing out is that Harwich, and when we started off in FY12, was paying 72% of these costs. It's gone up now to almost 3/4 of those costs. By FY25, just 5 years from now, or 4 years from now, it's heading towards being almost 80% of those costs. And if we look out when that group of kindergartners now are seniors in high school in FY33, we'd anticipate that Harwich is probably paying 87% of the costs above and beyond minimum required contribution. So, so the next slide here just looks at what the per pupil difference is if you multiply that out by the number of students. And, so a $941 per pupil difference back in FY12 times the number of kids at Chatham Elementary School starts to balloon up to something that's a lot more than just $941. And it looks at what that impact would be in FY21, what that impact looks like in would look like in FY25. On some level, these numbers are sort of over exaggerations, because at the end of the day, the school district does get Chapter 70 money so state money comes in and offsets this difference in per pupil expenditure. So a better way to look at this would be to, and we have a slide coming up that really sort of looks at the budget itself and backs out some of those costs by breaking out the cost to run the elementary schools by town. But anything besides just doing the straightforward regional agreement and the assessment that's played out in that regional agreement involves us looking at the regional agreement and amending it in some way, shape, or form. And that's something that the superintendent can't do, something that the school committee can't do. At the end of the day, we need to bring this group together, the school committee, the select boards, and come up with some different way of assessing costs for the regional school district and moving that forward with support of our governing bodies to the taxpayers and the voters of our two towns, because to change the regional agreement at the end of the day involves votes and approval from both town meetings. So I went out on a limb a few months back, making a recommendation to our school committee that a way to, I think, more fairly address the operating costs would be to take and apportion the cost to run each elementary school and have each elementary school pay for the operation, or have each town pay for the operation of its own elementary school. If we were doing that from the get-go in this school district, back when we had our first regional assessment in FY13, that may have shifted costs in the neighborhood of $408,000 towards Chatham, and so Harwich would have paid less, Chatham would be paying more, based on FY21, as we were going into the year thinking about how the school district would operate pre-COVID. That amount would have grown to $525,000 if Harwich paid for Harwich Elementary School and Chatham paid for Chatham Elementary School. And if we look forward just 4 years out to when Chatham is one section per grade level in its building, we'd anticipate that cost is probably closer to $738,000 that Harwich would save if it were paying for only its elementary school and Chatham paying for its elementary school. So that was one way that we, or at least that I proposed that we look at this. And we have been working with legal counsel to come up with some wording that could, if approved by all here and ultimately supported at town meetings, could create an alternative assessment, for the school district moving forward. That addresses half of the challenge here, and the other half of the challenge is not something necessarily that we'll be solving tonight, but it's a conversation that that's beginning to happen, and I know that the school committee is starting to make very articulated plans on having community-wide meetings to address the educational piece. In terms of addressing the educational piece, to come up with what might be the ideal teaching and learning environment at the elementary level for our school district. The challenge that we have at the moment is Chatham Elementary School may be, and again, this is open to individuals feeling very strongly one way or the other, I think, on it. But Chatham Elementary for some is looked at as being just this very small, supportive, nurturing environment. For others, there's a concern that having only one grade or one section per grade level potentially is limiting social interactions within the elementary school, and it may be too small for some children, and particularly if it gets to the point that it's not only one section per grade level, but those sections become small. It could become too small to sort of have vibrant discussions in classes, or you have situations where classrooms can become so small that strong personalities in the classroom start to sort of dominate in too small environments. So there's a wealth of literature out there that having small elementary schools or having small class sizes is good, and we have small class sizes across the district. The question is, at some point, you start to get too small. The challenge with being too small isn't just from being too small on a student standpoint. There's also a challenge on being too small from a staff standpoint. And we're beginning to see this more and more when it comes to professional development. When we do professional development, that you'll have Harwich elementary teachers have multiple peers to interact with and to share ideas and lesson plans. On some level, maybe a blessing of the pandemic is using things like Zoom and Google Meets to have maybe more sharing between buildings, because at Chatham Elementary School, we've got a kindergarten and next year a first grade teacher that are the only one in that building, and so having peers to go and bounce ideas off of and lesson plans and things that are working is important for teachers too, and it benefits kids. But it's a challenge when a building becomes small. So again, addressing smallness at Chatham Elementary School is not something the superintendent can do or something that the school committee can necessarily do. At the end of the day, if we are to address anything, the regional agreement's very clear. The regional agreement states that we're going to have one elementary school in each town, and that the children of that town go to that elementary school, which really sort of by language locks us into Chatham kids will go to Chatham Elementary School, Harwich kids to Harwich Elementary School, and there's not a way for the school superintendent or school committee to sort of force force Harwich children into Chatham Elementary School. We can only do it through opening the building up for inter-district school choice and school choice from elsewhere. So we went and did a survey about 3 years ago that and got feedback from parents. Did another survey recently to get some feedback from parents at the elementary level and staff at the elementary level on what their wants would be. The one thing that we added to the new survey is that we also added in the reality that by FY25, we'll be at a place where conceptually we can have all children under one roof if it were Harwich Elementary School. The building's big enough. And as I said, when the school district was coming together, there were 6 sections per grade level at Harwich Elementary School. As enrollment has declined in Harwich, just like it's declined in Chatham, there's only 5 sections per grade level at Harwich Elementary School. And in FY25, we'll be at a place where there'll be 5 sections in Harwich, 1 in Chatham, conceivably everybody could be under one roof. I am not, as the superintendent, saying that that's the ideal thing. I just wanted to make sure that if we, if we did a survey, let's at least have as an option to go and get some feedback from families on what if we were all under one roof. So we put out a survey and had 4 options. There are other ways to go and look at, there are other ways to go and look at how you could potentially reorganize. This was sort of an initial cursory conversation, and or cursory sort of outreach for some input. And I'm sure that we're going to hear about a lot of other great ideas from parents as we have more discussions with them over the upcoming months. But the options that we put out were no reconfiguration, just keep the regional agreement as it is. If Chatham becomes small, that's okay. And I know there's a lot of families in Chatham that bought into Chatham because of that sort of nice, small, family-focused atmosphere. Another would be to redistrict, to have some communities like East Harwich that are closer to geographically to Chatham Elementary than they are to Harwich Elementary, and to have those communities or sections of Harwich go to Chatham Elementary to bolster Chatham, to have it be at least 2 sections per grade level, which would then have students flowing from Harwich Elementary in some ways to Chatham Elementary. Another option that I know a number of our staff have articulated a desire for is to have upper and lower elementary schools where all the teachers of the same grade level would be within the same building. And so that you'd see at a Harwich Elementary, maybe the younger students there, and then they come to Chatham Elementary for 3rd or 4th grade, or vice versa. And then the 4th option would be to house everybody under one roof. We put out this survey in December of 2020. We got almost the exact same response rate that we did for the survey that we put out a few years earlier. So when just under 500 parents responded and staff in both of those surveys. Both of those surveys, I would say, had very similar results in that our staff went and felt very strongly about the possibility of having that upper and lower elementary school was something that they favored a lot, and that was similar to the previous survey. What we also found is that just like the previous survey, is that Chatham parents and Harwich parents tend to favor, we'll say, polar opposite things in how they responded. So the Chatham parents were more likely in this survey to favor favor some form of redistricting, where Harwich families would come to Chatham. And so the green zone is sort of in these little tables is where you're finding the sort of the majority. The red zone was what they least wanted to see, and they least wanted to see everybody at one roof. They didn't want to see the Chatham children heading to Harwich to all be at Harwich Elementary School. And then you see the Harwich parents, they're sort of on the opposite side. They were preferring to see everybody at under one roof at Harwich, having no change to the regional agreement or redistricting as their least favorite. And it might be that formation of upper and lower schools would be that happy medium for the parents and also for our staff. And school choice parents fell along the same lines as the Harwich parents. So so the issue here is that this is something, again, superintendent can't fix, school committee can't fix. The regional agreement's really clear that there'll be an elementary school in both towns. The kids from that town will go to that elementary school. And if we want to do something differently, there needs to be a recommendation that that would come from the school committee and superintendent back to the boards, and would have to go to the voters at a town meeting. And so so this is, this is a conversation that started. It's going to continue over the next months. This is not something that that I see a recommendation coming, to town meetings this year, or even a fall town meeting. I think it would be great to see this conversation start now, and hopefully continue when we are able to get back in and have face-to-face conversations in buildings too. So we went and looked at, how could we change the assessment method to have each of the towns, if we follow the recommendation I had, have each of the towns pay for its own elementary school. It does involve a change to the regional agreement. We've looked at this, and the iterations that we've shared with the town managers and finance directors it's based on still using the minimum required contribution, and then having the towns pay for the cost of their elementary school. So we'd look at sort of the district's total budget, that minimum required contribution, and then assess the cost for each school's elementary school. The remaining operational costs would then be assessed the way we currently do it, on that 3-year rolling average. So, so at the moment we have each member town uses its, we take off the Chapter 70, the Chapter 78 and other receipts. We go and take the, the minimum required contribution that the state has, and does it, and we do all of the costs are apportioned to the town based on that 3-year rolling average. So this, this adds just an additional step in where we're taking, and in addition to that minimum required contribution, we're also taking the cost to run the elementary school in each town, both in terms of the cost to run that academic program, but also the personnel costs, including health insurance, is how we've done the calculation. So when we did the calculation for,
Scott, oh,
sure.
I'm sorry, is that me? So before you move into that, I just want to be mindful of our agenda for just a moment. And let me if I could just pause you right there. Does anybody have any questions or comments or any clarifications that need to be made at this point regarding the per pupil spending before we start moving into what we want to talk with you about this evening? Does anybody have anything? And you can just put your hand up. Dean, go ahead.
I just had a question. Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question on one of the slides. With respect to Harwich parents, Scott, was there any breakdown as between those Harwich families that lived closer to Chatham Elementary School and those that do not?
Dean, we didn't go dive deeper into it in terms of geographically what sub-community in Harwich did they belong to. So no, we don't know if East Harwich, for instance, felt differently than folks closer to Harwich Port.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Questions, comments, clarifications? Jeff, did you have one? Go ahead.
Yeah, Scott, the choice parents that were surveyed, were they from Harwich or from outside the district?
So the choice parents were school choice parents from outside the district, attending both Harwich Elementary School and Chatham Elementary School. And I noted there that the choice parents fell more along the responses of the Harwich parents. Mm-hmm. I would actually say that a way to interpret that is we have more we have more choice parents or more choice families at Harwich Elementary School because it's larger than Chatham Elementary School. So I think we're seeing just and I would say many of those choice parents are coming from sort of the Dennis and Yarmouth community, so more likely to be saying, I'd rather have everybody at Harwich Elementary School than have to at some point be all the way in Chatham.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. The Chatham and Harwich parents seem to be kind of on the opposite ends of the spectrum. Harwich wouldn't mind one roof and Chatham wants to keep their one roof. But I did think there was some middle ground even in those two buckets, along with the staff for the concept of an upper and lower. So if you might comment on that, there was more agreement there than, I've had the benefit of seeing this data 2 or 3 times now, but there was more agreement there than I think we're giving it credit for.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think that, and that's why when we did the analysis on this one, I tried to lump it in green zones, where the majority was, let's say, red zones where the majority didn't want to be, and that yellow zone was what might be the happy medium. And I do think that concept of upper and lower seemed to be middle ground for for our staff, for families, in both communities, because it still has a school in each community. It has an elementary school in each town. Each child will go to will go to their hometown elementary school at some point. So that's we tried to sort of emphasize that maybe there is middle ground out there.
All right, thank you, Scott. Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you,
thank you.
Tina.
Anybody else? Questions, comments, clarifications? Okay, seeing none. So Scott, I'm sorry, Peter, go ahead. And you'll have to come off mute, Peter, right at the bottom left corner.
Okay, I have it. Thank you. Now, Scott, we never even talked about this, but if is there a way to well, there is, but do you have any idea what the transportation would be between the 2 towns when we start doing it, if you wanted to do it, between the 2 elementary schools? I mean, if you come from certain areas of this country, Chatham and Harwich are one town with the 2 elementary schools, and they move back and forth. But I just wondering if you've ever done had a look at that at all.
On some level, we already do that. So so at our high school, we pick up from both towns and bring the kids to one building. We pick up both kids from both towns and bring them to the middle school. So we're doing that on some level already, for middle school and high school. So I think the transportation, if you do look at an upper or lower, if that's where people want to explore, I think your transportation costs tend to increase for districts that have upper and lowers, in part because we likely would not be able to have just a simple 2 bus runs to get everybody to school. At the moment now, we have I think 13 buses that fan out between our communities, and 3 of them head to Chatham Elementary School, and the rest of them head to Harwich Elementary School, and then they turn around and go to the middle school, and 6 of the buses go to the middle school, and or 7 go to the middle school, and 6 go to the high school. I think if you come up with an upper and lower, because elementary kids tend to largely ride the bus, you're probably needing to have some sort of 3rd tier in there. So there's probably some transportation logistics to work through, and then there's the truth in advertising here is anytime that you have got transportation and the potential for that third tier, then you've got start times that you're looking at as a district. It gets pretty complex.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Anybody else? Comments, questions, clarifications? Okay, seeing none. Scott, it looked like you were moving to, I guess, the current assessment, and then are you going to show the alternative assessment right after the current? Or did you want to take a pause?
I think that we can, I'm just looking at the agenda trying to decide how best to get at being a place for this body to have a potential vote. Do you want to look at what the assessment is and what the assessment would be? Does that drive getting to should you have a proposed?
So if I could make a recommendation, Scott, could we see, because it looked like you were putting up the current, if we could look at the current assessment as it is right now, and then we could take a look at the languaging and then the alternative assessment, because the alternative assessment would go into effect should the languaging be approved. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, so let's take a look so everybody can see what the situation is now with the current assessment. So let's just, if you could pop that slide up.
Are we back to the slide?
Yep.
Okay, so under the current method, running it through the same way that we have done the assessments since the district has been together, we're looking at as a school district a draft budget that has a 0.99% increase. And the way that assessment impacts the two towns, again, a lot of this has to do with that minimum required contribution, and minimum required contribution involves a number of students that are attending the school district are embedded in that minimum required contribution, and minimum required contribution doesn't have that 3-year rolling average smoothing to it, and it has the minimum required contribution because enrollment keeps slowly shifting from Chatham, where Chatham's losing enrollment faster than Harwich is losing enrollment. There continues to be a greater number of Harwich students proportionally in the school district. So what was 72% when the school district came together is now roughly 75% and heading towards 87% by FY33. So so Harwich's impact of the assessment is Harwich is seeing their assessment go up under the current method by just over 3%, 3.16%. Chatham's is going down in part largely because of loss of enrollment. So the minimum required contribution for Chatham isn't changing as much as Harwich is. That's set by the state. But then you have this enrollment shift that is also driving theirs down. And this is what we've seen. I believe this is now the 3rd fiscal year where we've seen, the Chatham assessment, go negative, and the Harwich being positive. And you can imagine that as the superintendent goes before the select boards each year, it becomes a tough one, when I go present in Harwich, and when you're presenting this number that's that's positive, or it's increasing for Harwich, yet it's a decrease in school spending in Chatham.
Thank you, Scott. So does anybody, before we move into the regional agreement, the proposed change, the languaging, and then how that would affect the assessment, does anybody have a question? And I will scroll through here. Just hold your hand up. Shireen, go ahead.
Just to clarify, Scott, that's based on the per pupil cost, correct? What you just presented to us.
So, so the budget, this isn't per pupil cost. This
Okay.
is the
Operation of the,
this is the operational budget.
Got it.
We didn't divide it out by per pupil in this slide.
okay,
And it's the operational budget for the district, not looking at a elementary school.
okay.
Right, thank you. Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, so the way the budgets would stand today was that slide. So we'd pay 3% less and Harwich would pay 3% more than last year's assessment. So that's what that slide shows.
Correct.
Okay, anybody else? Thank you, Jeff.
Yep.
Comments, questions, anybody? All right, so now, Scott, I think what we might want to do is to move to the language. I believe you've got the languaging of that, and this was our school attorney took a look at this and came to us with some proposed languaging, which we want to take a look at. And then that, should we agree that this is, you know, the right thing to do, it would affect the assessment, of which we're also going to take a look at the alternative assessment, should that languaging be accepted. So Scott, if you want to pull that slide up. Whoop. And I know, yeah, and we've got it in.
Is that, do I need to zoom it more?
If you can, I can see it, but it might, just for our viewing audience. Okay, that's good. That's good. Thank you.
Right, so when we reached out to our attorney, the attorney emphasized that the state, you know, the state's going to want to have to sort of reiterate how we have been doing the assessment all along. So how the regional school district has been assessed is based on what's called in Massachusetts the statutory method. So, so there's a default in here that that has, you know, that re-articulates the statutory method that's in our current current regional agreements assessment definition. So, you know, so in the first little clause here, it basically says that the alternative assessment must be voted annually by the member towns. And the way this plays out in regions that use an alternative assessment, it typically in the warrant just prior to a vote on the school's budget or the school district's budget, there's a vote on the, you know, to use an alternative assessment or not that happens in each town. So so each year you're annually reaffirming that we're not going to follow the statutory method, we're going to follow the alternative assessment method in how we are apportioning costs to the two towns. So that's what that first section under A is. The next section where it says statutory method is the fallback. If you don't affirm the alternative assessment method, then the statutory method is how the district's cost would get apportioned to the town. So under the alternative assessment method, it's following, you know, what we've, you know, articulated before, where we would apportion or we would first, you know, take the state's minimum required contribution that's determined each year, and each town would be responsible for that minimum as defined by the state. Above and beyond that minimum, we would apportion the cost to for each town's own elementary schools. So the cost for Harwich Elementary School would be apportioned to Harwich, Chatham to Chatham, and then any remaining costs to run the district would be apportioned based on that 3-year rolling average of the foundation enrollment, which is what currently happens with the costs above and beyond the minimum required contribution. So there's this step 2 is the new step that's added in there. And again, the last little bullet here is basically saying that the alternative assessment method must be approved each year by all member towns. If not, then then you end up back at the statutory method.
Thank you, Scott. And before we take a look at the alternative assessment versus the current assessment based on this languaging, does anybody have questions on the languaging? Okay, I'm seeing no hands. Larry, go ahead.
Thank you, Tina. I assume this language is based on the one scenario where there'd be each town would pay for their own elementary school. What's the language? Is that true? And if not, what would the language look like if we went to the upper and lower scenario?
So I think if we went to an upper or lower scenario, we might need to go relook at how one assesses. So I think that this probably covers us for this. It creates a new status quo. And if we do something educationally different and do come up with an upper or lower, I think it probably involves a deeper conversation in terms of how we should apportion costs. I have my own opinion as the superintendent, and I actually think that this method could, even in the case of upper or lower, work okay. I think what gets a little bit squishy is, if you end up having, creating a situation where, where Harwich, where the Harwich building becomes proportionately having more empty classrooms than what it currently does, Harwich's cost per pupil would end up going up, and Chatham's would end up going down, because it's how many kids are in the building that really drives that per pupil cost for the building. And again, I think we'd have to look at what does that educational program look like, and and then have some some conversations on what is an equitable way to fund it.
Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. Anybody from the boards? And David, I see your hand. The only, this is really, it's a joint meeting. And we did not bill this as a public hearing or to take questions from the public. So I'm not really at liberty, unfortunately, unless everybody here would agree to take your question, but then I hesitate to do that because that's not how we build this meeting.
Okay, would there be an opportunity to speak later?
Tonight, or because with the school committee is having our meeting tomorrow, February 11th at 7 probably, because we have a budget hearing. We're very happy to take your comments tomorrow. I'm sure that Chatham and Harwich at their next meeting would take your questions there as well. But this is just, this was a meeting to bring people together. Ed, go ahead.
Given David's involvement over the years in creating the district and building the school, I would be very happy to hear his comments now, rather than force him to have to spend 3 nights attending each of our meetings to hear it. And I think it would be good for the entire group to hear.
Okay, so what I would do in this case is ask the 2 boards, or the 3 boards, including the school committee, do we want to make an exception to hear what David Whitcomb has to say? Because this, again, was not billed as a public hearing. And I guess we may have to go, I could look for consensus, or we could each take our own votes within our group.
Well, why don't you
go ahead, Jeff.
Why don't you try for consensus first and see where you get?
Okay, so anybody who is opposed to David Whitcomb making comments tonight, put your hand up. All right, we have one in opposition. Anybody who is in favor of hearing what David has to say, given his history with the regional agreement? You can raise your hand. All right, it looks like we have a clear majority of people that are willing to hear David. So David, I will yield the mic to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I apologize for any inconvenience to everyone. I didn't realize the parameters of the meeting. I had several things I wanted to say, and I didn't realize that there was going to be a vote on the alternate assessment tonight. So that's what really made me want to speak. I mean, I feel very strongly that until we resolve the future of the Chatham Elementary School, that any amendment, may it be inevitable, is premature. I think, we're talking about educational and financial benefits, and clearly for Chatham, the educational benefit is to continue with an elementary school. And for Harwich, I think the financial benefits are obvious. So I think there's a way to do that, but I don't know if we can do that if you make that vote tonight. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Tina, you're muted.
And I'm muted. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Anybody questions or comments based on the languaging that was up on the screen?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, no, to echo David's sentiments, and, I don't know when you want comments, but I think a potential vote on that language tonight is premature. And I think everybody that's on the kind of the working group with me knows that that's my feeling and knows that's what I was going to say. I think this is a fairly weighty issue for both towns, and there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot to unpack from the educational perspective of how we run a viable elementary program in Chatham and in Harwich, and what that entails. And it really begs many further inputs from parents, community members, et cetera, before we decide that, hey, look at this alternate assessment. It seems like it makes sense. We ought to take a vote on it. I would not vote for that this evening. Now, it may be a reasonable approach, but I think we need to be more creative about our thinking about other approaches to, frankly, get more fannies and seats in Chatham Elementary and in Harwich Elementary. I think, we need to explore the inter and intra-district choice issue more. I think we filled seats in Chatham for years with choice. A lot of kids from Harwich, but a lot of kids from Brewster and Dennis and Yarmouth. So I'm not sure we've aggressively pushed choice as an option to get more kids in seats. And that doesn't necessarily put money in coffers, but it creates a more viable educational program with more kids in seats. I'm not, as an individual, as a parent, and a former parent of Chatham kids in elementary school, I'm not particularly interested in one class per grade. I agree with Scott and others that are more knowledgeable than I about education, that it gets to be too small. So I think we got to look for a model where we get at least 2 classes per grade in Chatham. We very much want to have an elementary school in Chatham, and I think Harwich very much also wants to have an elementary school. But we want them both to be viable programs. So I'm not particularly interested in saying, yeah, alternative assessment, and yeah, we're going to have 1 class, and here we go. I really think we need to challenge ourselves as a district, a superintendent, boards of selectmen, and towns to figure out a way to get more fannies in seats. You do know that as a board of selectmen, under Shireen's leadership and huge interest by our board, we are really trying to generate more affordable and attainable housing in Chatham. It's really one of our serious endeavors, our highest priorities this year. And that won't yield kids probably for 3 or 4 or 5 years, but we're really not interested in giving up on an elementary school at this point. We want to make an investment in affordable and attainable housing to get younger people to stay in Chatham. So that's kind of the landscape for me. Until we have a viable approach, and I think you guys are committed, the school committee is committed, until we have a viable approach for our plan B, I keep saying, it's going to be maybe a hard sell in Chatham to say, we want to do this alternative assessment and increase our net by 500 grand or so. And if it's 500 grand this year, know, because we have fewer kids next year, it could be 650 grand if we go for the alternative assessment again. It could be 850 grand the next year. So I think the nub of it is to get more kids in the seats. And again, organically, that may take some time in Chatham, but I think, you know, if we're going to have an elementary school in Chatham, and we can't be under one roof this year in Harwich, so we're going to have an elementary school in Chatham. So let's try to make it as viable one as we can. So those are my interim thoughts. So I think we've got a lot of work to do on this one, to be honest with you. I'll be quiet. And you've heard me enough anyway.
Thank you, Jeff. And I see Sharon's hand and then Terry. So Sharon, go ahead, and then Terry.
Well, I'm speaking directly to what Jeff said. Jeff, you know I love Chatham Elementary and want to see that work well. But you're the mathematical money person. And so when I played with the numbers on this, it only costs more to import kids from Dennis and Nauset and stuff like that. When you get, like, the way we did it in Chatham, we would import like a whole classroom of kids. And so then you'd have a minimum of, would be getting in $5,500 or so per kid. And that amount for a classroom doesn't pay for the teacher. Never mind the whole, and I don't know anymore what the taxpayers are willing to pay for Chatham to supplement other kids from other towns. But I know from Harwich that there's been a real clear message that money is the big issue. And
Oh, I know. Yeah.
so I don't know the answer. The affordable housing is a great idea.
Yeah.
So thank you, Sharon. And I know you posed a comment to Jeff, but I'm going to take Terry's comment, and then Jeff, if you wanted to respond in just a moment. Terry, go ahead. And you're on mute, Terry, if you just want to unmute yourself. It's right in the bottom left corner of your screen. There should be a microphone if you take your cursor all the way down to the left. All right, there you go.
I should have had this memorized, but my response, hey, good to see you, David, by the way. And your point is well taken. Jeff, I'm one of the ones regarding Chatham Elementary. I'd like to see the school go for 25, 30 years. No problem at all with that, with me. However, in my whole career, my whole lifestyle has been in schooling. Whether that gives me a half an insight or not, who knows? My point is, I think Harwich is looking at a one-step, two-step issue here. Because if you combine the co-issues, this could drag on for another year or 2 years. And you're right, if it's $525,000 this year that Chatham subsidizes, it's another 550 or 600,000, year 3, year 4, until finally, voila, magic with a two-level system. And isn't that great? 150 kids. And by the way, even with that subsidy, Chatham families and 500 Chatham kids have to be bought into whatever plan. So frankly, I think we really need all of these three groups. And we've been going at this 3 years ago, we chatted about it, the difficulty, we left it alone, but now we're discovering not only now is a fiscal priority issue with Chatham, and I don't know the real money issues, I'm not on that side, but I think it's serious money. And Harwich is not in a position to say, we can carry this for another 3 years. And the irony is, of course, if Harwich was paying extra for their own Harwich Elementary, you just say, fine. However, that being said, I really think these three committees need to make a decision, whether it's a real vote or an agreement, that this parity needs to be shaved down as quickly as we can do it. And then the second plan that the school committee has decided to do in the next month with parent forums next fall, get all the great insights, and frankly, kind of being in the business, I think there's a limited number of super plans out there that can be adjusted to do both things. Keep per pupil cost fairly even, and at the same time, fill Chatham seats. So respectfully, and I can appreciate Chatham has had a great go at it for 10 years with not only a tremendous financial gift, with co-equal learning in a great school system, regardless of there are 500 Chatham kids or 100. So that's all good stuff, and I like that. But this number has gotten so high, I can't justify going before our select board and saying, we're doing this because it's, good neighbor policy. And I really don't see anything in the original agreement that said that this would be an automatic fallback position. And if so, we wouldn't be talking about it. So whether or not the Chatham folks feel they really want to keep their schools, but to pay an extra 500, well, that is a problem. And the community, as well as all of this group, needs to help sell that idea. But I don't think we need to sell it on the backs of the Harwich folks. So I think this three-group joint meeting here is a good start after a year of discussing it with a smaller group. And I think it's a step one regarding the parity of the money. And then step two will be worked on in the next 6, 7, 9 months with Karen, including to involve that. So that's my 10 cents.
Thank you, Terry. Go ahead, Jeff. You can have a
Yeah,
response.
if I might, and I won't take up everybody's time. I want to hear from my fellow board members. But to respond to Sharon's note about the school choice, yeah, it doesn't bring it. If you have capacity, you can fill capacity with students of choice and have more viable classroom. It's not a financial gain per se, but it's a capacity gain. If you're going to have the lights on and a teacher there, then you can backfill with choice. And Terry, I hear you loud and clear. I think, if we want to have a viable elementary school in Chatham, we have to redistribute what we've got, or attract new players in, or come up with a different model. So you want to talk about what Plan B is going to be. It's either we redistribute the kids we have, so we have a viable school in Chatham. We attract more students to Chatham and Harwich, hopefully, or we do the two-tier thing, or even get more creative and have specialty schools or whatever. But I'm getting out there a little bit. But I think I think there are other models out there. So I'm going to shut up, and I want to hear from my board and the Harwich board as well. Thank you. I'll be quiet now.
Thank you, Terry. Go ahead and have a response, and then
a quick response, if I can get an analogy. If a family is planning a road trip and a vacation, and they're saving money, and all of a sudden they discover the car they're going to use is all broke down, I think step one is to get that car fixed before the next step of going on a trip. And that's kind of how I see this. We need to somehow correct what never was planned for to then move forward. And some of it can be simultaneous, but thanks, Tina.
Thank you, Terry. And before I take other questions and comments, I'm going to ask Scott, could you put up on the screen so that everybody here and the viewing audience can see the difference between the current assessment versus what an alternative assessment would look like? So if we could just take a minute to look at that, and then we'll come back to this discussion.
Okay, so where we were, the current draft assessment for FY22 had us at a 3.16% increase for Harwich and a -3.07 for Chatham. If we were to have each town pay for their own elementary school after the minimum required contribution, it would for FY22 shift the cost so that Harwich would be paying 1.27% more than the present year. Chatham would be paying 2.64% more than the present year. It's still a 0.99% budget increase. And if my math is correct, that is a shift in position of $507,550 where Chatham is paying that much more and Harwich that much less. And I want to emphasize that that really is a one-time readjustment. So so the following school year, if you were looking at how would the budget play out, you likely aren't seeing a 1.27 and a 2.64 if these minimum required contributions and enrollment keep shifting. But it at least goes and I think corrects, and this is what I want to emphasize. It corrects I think a flaw the way the assessment is operating in the regional agreement, where the Harwich taxpayers are disproportionately picking up the tab for the operational costs of the other elementary school, just the sheer math on how the regional agreement plays out. And so it does provide fiscal relief by lowering the overall assessment to Harwich in going into FY22 if this were to be approved at town meetings, and potentially will continue then with Harwich's assessment being that much lower from that, so it'll grow, but it's growing off of a smaller number moving forward.
Thank you, Scott. All right, with that being said, go ahead, Peter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Scott, why I had a number in my head that I thought when you came over to when you briefed the Chatham board of $500 and some odd thousand, as opposed to the 234 I just saw. Am I right or wrong, or has that changed?
So yeah, Peter, if even in the earlier in the presentation, when we were doing when I was initially having these conversations and looking at what the impact would have been, I think what you're referring to is on I'm trying to pick the right slide. So it was slide 11, and I can just kind of project that really quickly. So I think what you might be remembering is that we looked at if you look at how this, if we implemented this assessment change in FY21, it would have been about a it should be a $572,000, 537 would be the assessment would have increased in Chatham if Chatham paid for its own elementary school at FY21 and Harwich paid for its own elementary school. So the reason the number's a little bit smaller going into FY22 is that we've been on our end doing what we can to tighten our budget throughout. So the elementary costs at Chatham Elementary have gone down some from some belt tightening that's happening across the district. So it's caused that number to, as we've strive for some efficiencies to make that number a little bit less than what it would have been.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Shireen, did you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Thank you, Tina. Just a couple of questions, Scott. Just bear with me for a second, okay? Because I'm really interested in seeing what the long-term solution is for this versus something every year. If this assessment adjustment happens this year, what happens next year? Do we come back and again we'll have another ask for another reassessment or another shift or change in the amount of money, or how is that going to work?
So in theory, if the boards were to come to an agreement on changing the way we assess, we would assess following the alternate assessment moving forward. But yeah, but at town meeting, so at next year's spring town meeting, we would first vote on an alternative assessment to adopt that approach, and then vote the school budget. So you would, so you would see that, that the process of having each town pay for the cost of running its own elementary school would be the new norm for our district, as opposed to the old norm has us just take the minimum required contribution and then just divide out costs above and beyond that by that 3-year rolling average, where Harwich is paying 3/4 of the cost to run, to run everything, in Chatham 1/4 above and beyond the minimum required contribution. And that's where if you look at this growing cost per pupil happening at Chatham Elementary School, Harwich ends up picking up 3/4 of that tab, and it ends up being a sort of a bigger amount of money that they're picking up compared to Chatham picking up 1/4 of the per pupil costs over at Harwich Elementary School.
Okay, so our little elementary school, it interplays with the dynamics of our community sustainability, and we're really interested in finding a long-term solution. And I'd really like to address this in those terms going forward, saying that there would be some community forums and such. I really like that idea of setting that as how we're framing everything at this point. But I'll yield back to Tina. Thank you.
Shireen, thank you, Shireen. And Corey, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to revisit an earlier conversation, because I do agree with Shireen. Long-term solution is really what we're ideally looking for. And I think we're all looking for what's best for the students, ideally. Obviously, the numbers, we're going to crunch the numbers in both communities, but we're ideally looking for what's best for the pupils. So living in Chatham, growing up in Chatham, having kids in the Chatham schools, I would love to see, the Chatham Elementary kind of rebound and thrive in the future. That would be my ideal goal. But I do think I'm trying to keep all my options open a little bit. I think having a little broader mindset on this. So again, when we talk about if we were to agree to these alternative assessments and revisit it next year, that is with the assumption that the structures would remain the same. Chatham Elementary has their school, Harwich Elementary their school. But I haven't totally dismissed the upper and lower concept myself. I do think there are some pluses in that model. Having certain kids have had certain programs. Like I had some of my kids, my kids have gone through the school system. They had certain programs, the living museums, et cetera. And some of the programs were phased out because they weren't offered in the Harwich Elementary system. So for equity and the teachers, they kind of missed out in some areas. So I think having the teachers in the same grades working in the same building would be good for staffing myself. So I do think that has merit to have further discussion as a long-term solution. I will recognize the surveys that have been put out there support that, at least from a Chatham perspective, but I have not dismissed the upper and lower concept yet myself. So at the end of the day, I want Chatham to have an elementary school in its community. It's vital to our long-term plans for our community. But I do think we should need to really take the public input, take the public forums, and look for a long-term solution, recognizing that is probably the best for the kids in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you. Corey. Dean, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few points. As I read the formula for the proposed assessment, it looks as though every year town meeting would have to take a vote on whether to adopt the alternate assessment for that year. Is that correct, Scott?
Yeah, so according to, I guess, council, and other regional districts that have long done alternative assessments, they take a vote reaffirming that this is what they're going to do, because the default under the law is that the assessment follows the statutory method. So we inquired whether this could be, could town meeting vote to do something that is counter to the statutory method that's set out under general law, and that you need to reaffirm it annually, not have one town meeting agree to do it one way, and from that point on you're kind of following the alternative without having that annual reaffirming.
So you could have a circumstance on a given year where the town of Chatham votes to do it and the town of Harwich votes not to do it. So I assume the alternate assessment doesn't go into effect that particular for the budget that's being planned for that town meeting.
That would be correct. Much the same way that that if there ever was a scenario where in order to fund the budget as it was presented, one town needed an override and the other one did it, and the override didn't pass, it defaults back to whatever that lower budget was, so you do end up having that annual,
right,
a little bit of budgetary wild card.
Yeah, and it sort of brings back memories of what happened in Dennis versus Yarmouth in recent years, where it just seems to me there's a flaw in the formula in this regard, because it gives rise potentially to disputes between the two towns every year. That's how I'm reading it. I think that in any event, the formula provides something more of a band-aid rather than a permanent long-term solution to the problems that I think all acknowledge. And I tend to agree with the comments made by Shireen that the underlying issue of the future of the two elementary schools needs to be addressed hand in hand with respect to determining what the financial formulas are. I was intrigued when Larry asked the question early on about the upper and lower, because that's something that I've thought of as well. Talked about how, and you used your hand gestures, that you could bring about you could achieve a balance in the equities of per pupil costs with that particular formulation of the schools. So I guess I asked the question rhetorically, if the purpose of tonight's meeting and this whole discussion is to address the inequities in per pupil costs as between the two schools, then it would seem to me that the upper-lower configuration is a possible model for dealing with that, rather than opening up the regional which the formula or introduce an alternative assessment. I will say that from a practical matter, just my reading of the townspeople of Chatham, I suspect that if the selectmen were to put the select board, sorry, we're in a select board now, were to bring this forward as proposed by council to our town meeting, I'm not sure it would pass without some understanding and commitment for what is going to happen. That's just an observation. I very much would like for Chatham to continue and Harwich to continue to be good neighbors. And we've worked well on the IMA for the sewer projects, and we understand the financial predicament that Harwich has, and how every year in recent times, since I've been on the select board in Chatham, to go before the Harwich and come back to them for adjustments, which they justifiably seek on behalf of the voters of Harwich, but I'm not sure that what's being proposed tonight is the right sequence of how to deal with this. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Dean, you cut out about 3/4 of the way through your very important comment, so I hate to prevail on you, but I might, Tina, ask him to repeat himself.
Well, I'm not sure where I stopped.
You said you didn't think perhaps it could pass at town meeting.
Yeah, I don't think it could pass at town meeting. I think the balance of what I said was that I greatly respect, having served on the IMA committee with you, Jeff, with select members from Harwich, the comity and good relations between the two towns. And I understand the predicament that the school committee and the superintendent has in going before the town of Harwich every year and is asked to come back and with a reduced budget, and the school district has done that. And I understand the financial pressures on the town of Harwich, but I just think that what's being proposed tonight is not the right sequencing of how to go about this. And I'd like to see a longer term solution as part of this mix. I hope you all heard that.
Yes.
Thank you, Dean. And Terry, I see your hand, and Larry, I think yours is going up as well. So Terry, go ahead.
Thanks, Tina. I appreciate and I may have said it mistakenly about being good neighbors. This goes well beyond good neighbors, and I'm reaching a point, and I've served with Jeff and had a terrific experience moving this 2 separate school committee towns into the region. I myself personally grew from it, so I thought there was tremendous benefits, personally, as well as what we've done for both towns. That being said, I must be speaking to myself, because if living in Chatham, and I saw that the town of Harwich, which doesn't have a tax base similar to Chatham, was subsidizing the Chatham Elementary School to a tune of about $5,000 or $6,000 per child, year after year. Oh, I might want to have a long-term plan too, because when do we begin to take care of that lack of parity? Now, is it me? And I'd like to invite my select board, who I must have threw a vote for them, and they're sitting watching this or listening, and I've said my piece. I also think better schools in Chatham as far as balance of kids, moving children. The 2 levels, I've experienced that as a working salaried guy, so I have no problem with that. But I really feel whether the sequence of hearing even the select board from Chatham saying there is a parity, we recognize that, and one of your members said small school, and we maybe should think long term, but I haven't heard anything said about how long does Harwich continue to subsidize at that price. I know, for example, we're negotiating with the staff. That amount of money each year could come up with a COLA, a 1% or a 2%. Or that money could go towards a language arts reading program. It's $480,000, for example, we came up with. But I see a lot, or return it right to our select board to raise this similar issues that Chatham has, sewage, and all of the other things. Now, I know there's a sewage subcommittee, but I just go back to, and maybe it's just my Irishness, I go back to the fact that there's a huge disparity. I came from a district that had 7 elementary schools. It wasn't a region. And every elementary school, whether it was the smallest one in West Barnstable or Hyannis, with a mixed group of youngsters, to the dollar, it was the per pupil same cost. And the 12 principals at the time would raise a question, well, we have all the special ed kids, so we need that. That never would occur. Now, I know this is a region, so it's a little bit different. And I know it would be a tough sell to your folks. But, Jeff mentions a historic context of how Chatham and Harwich got together 10, 12 years ago. But also looking into that, there's been a tremendous benefit financially for Chatham, as I understand my homework. The first year that we joined, there was a $2.5 million net decrease in the former Chatham K-12 education budget. that either went back to the taxpayers or beautifully, the town manager and select board members spread it through the needs you've had. And that has continued on for the last 7 or 8 or 9 years. And every year, unfortunately, because of the number of youngsters who can't move into town, our regional budget for Chatham has decreased. And not that we've had a tremendous growth in our kids, but we didn't have had an increase. So I really do see it as a one and a very quick second step. And what type of future, the Chatham Elementary with slow growth of kids, however, that all can be worked out. But I really would like to see some signal from our good neighbors that yes, there is some parity here. No, that's how the agreement was, and let's go from there. Sorry I took so long, Tina.
Thank you, Terry. Larry, go ahead.
Yes, my comments are brief because I think a lot's been said. I agree with the overall sentiment that it's too early to do a lot tonight in terms of long-term planning. However, to get to Terry's point and support that, as I understand what's going on now, we're subsidizing the elementary school systems above the agreement to the tune of about $520,000. And so my short term is hoping that Chatham will see it in their heart to help us on that. And then I'm hoping that we'll have the community discussions that you've talked about to look at options and get that to maybe town meeting a year from now. But my immediate concern is the short term.
Thank you, Larry. Anybody else? Ed, go ahead.
Yeah, listening to all the data and different proposed configurations, I think changing those configuration of the elementary schools obviously is something that's going to take a lot more conversation in the communities and amongst the stakeholders, both the faculty and the parents, before making a recommendation on changing that. But if you just look at either of the two potentials of shifting shifting around the enrollment districts, or going to an upper and a lower, or putting it all under one roof, that really financially wouldn't do anything for Harwich. We'd wind up with the same assessment system. And in any of those cases, because if you switch the enrollment districts, presumably Chatham, the school population would go up and the per pupil cost would go down, and there wouldn't be as large a discrepancy. If this 550,000 or whatever the exact figure is, that is the difference this year, is basically a product of falling enrollment. And really the only way on the long term to equalize that, if you leave the two elementary schools as they are, is by having the natural increase in procreation in Chatham to fill their school back up. So they have a greater number of students, and the per pupil cost equalizes. If that's not going to happen anytime soon, so what we're left with is on the short term, short of any other decision being made, is the continued subsidy of that small population in Chatham by Harwich taxpayers. if, 2 or 3 years from now, we decide that the two-tiered system is the proper solution to move to, there'd essentially, one would imagine, be an equalization in the number of students in each schools, and so that alternate assessment would go away, and we'd return to the old formula, and the cost to Harwich then would go back up, because that difference would no longer be there. And actually, as Scott indicated, given that transportation costs will probably increase, so that cost will go back up in excess of what we're paying now. So like I said, the only real way, if you're going to keep both districts, both schools open as elementary schools, is to somehow quickly and drastically encourage the increase in childbirth in Chatham, and I don't see how you do that. So I think we're left with Harwich continuing to bear the brunt of the discrepancy in per pupil spending between the two schools.
Thank you, Ed. Don, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to be as scholarly as Ed. I have a feeling that I'm closer to where Terry was. It's not Irish, Terry. There's a lot of truth there. The first thing I have to say is the trajectory we are on is totally untenable. I mean, it just can't continue, because these kids are going to come out of that smaller environment, and that disproportion is going to go in the upper grades. So there's going to have to be some rethinking somewhere down the road. But while we're being philosophical about this, the reality is that we're on the hook for about $500,000 extra to subsidize. I just want to put this plainly. If this had gone in front of a town meeting, where you would try to pitch to the town meeting folks in Harwich that there's going to come a time where 75 to 80% of the resources are going to be devoted with Harwich kids, and there's going to be disparity of payments, and at the same time you've got equal proportions of representation on a school committee, this would never have passed. I mean, I'm not sure what the solution is, whether we eventually invite another town to participate in the district or what. I know we're all talking about affordable housing, but as Ed pointed out, these things are way down the road. I mean, right now, this disparity is not only egregious, but it's growing. Something's got to be done now. To Larry's point, something has to be done now. And we can talk about the long-term solution that would be sustainable, but this can't continue to be borne by Harwich taxpayers, because there's going to come a time where they're just going to flat out turn down the budget, at which point we all have a dilemma.
Thank you, Don. Scott, go ahead.
So I just want to, I guess, emphasize and where Don left off. I find sometimes that being a regional superintendent, particularly in a region that is the state's, I mean, this is still the state's youngest regional school district, and I think in many ways it's this relatively new marriage, and and you're the superintendent that's like at times marriage counselor in this, and I do see this as something that there is tremendous immediacy to, and and I have great respect for for Jeff, but I don't think that this is something that we can afford to push off and wait on, and this is why. First of all, if you look at if you look at those survey results, the one thing that's abundantly clear is that Chatham parents want to be at Chatham Elementary School and Harwich parents want to be at Harwich Elementary School. You know, so while we all can see that there might be this happy middle ground somewhere in the middle, our parents aren't there. You know, like we can see the middle ground, our staff can see the middle ground, but our constituents don't see that middle ground. And they very much want to see their own neighborhood elementary schools. But the reality is that the way our regional agreement plays out right now, there's a subsidy that's happening, that's happening there. School choice isn't going to fix the problem. And the reason school choice won't fix this problem is, first, there is declining enrollment across the Cape. Like, we're all stealing enrollment from each other. So in many ways, bringing Monomoy together has helped with school choice, because we're keeping more of our kids that used to go to Nauset or DY here. But even then, we're still losing enrollment because there's just less and less kids. And sure, we could bring in another town, but the challenge is all those other towns are already in other regions. Everybody abutting us is in a region trying to go and maintain what they're doing in a landscape of declining enrollment. When Chatham, was Chatham Public Schools, yes, they had kids from Brewster come or Orleans, but the bulk of their enrollment was from Harwich. And bringing Monomoy together has had Harwich families look and say, well, we don't need to go to Chatham anymore to get that middle school or high school experience. It's all the same. So we've seen just fewer Harwich families opting to go cross over to Chatham. Some still do, but most of those that are doing it are still legacy parents. They're parents that did it before or may have choiced over when they were kids. I mean, it goes back quite a ways. The other thing that's I think important to understand is, even if we could get buy-in from parents to create an upper and a lower school, what it does is it ultimately would create a situation where we're removing enrollment from Harwich Elementary and sending it to Chatham Elementary. And again, remember, this is an economy of scales issue. It would cause Harwich Elementary's per pupil cost to go up, Chatham's per pupil cost to go down. So they would become more equal, but it became more equal on the back of the Harwich taxpayers when we did that. So at the end of the day, there really is, in the order of magnitude, of $500,000 budgetary challenge that the Harwich taxpayers are supporting. And then to kind of loop back to something that Terry said, I have a school committee. I have 8 bosses that I answer to. And when Terry was a principal in Barnstable, he had a superintendent that had a school board to answer to. That school board's directive to that superintendent in Barnstable was that there would be equity in funding across every elementary school in that district. My school committee to date has sort of tasked me with equity and program at our 2 elementary schools. And you could imagine if it were a school committee that was directing the superintendent to have equity and funding between the 2 elementary schools, it would create a very different scenario at Chatham Elementary School if we were to equalize funding. And nobody I would argue that none of the Chatham board and none of the Chatham parents want equity in funding. I think what everybody wants to see is equity in program. But I think we've got to find out some way to bring these 2 boards together to resolve the financial inequity so that we can maintain what we most want, which is equity of quality programming at our elementary schools. And I don't want us to lose that, because there's immediacy to that. And I think what we're seeing is we're hearing, maybe 2 boards in different places. And what I worry about is the thing that's most important to me is seeing a strong educational program at both elementary schools be maintained.
Thank you, Scott. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Scott. So just play along with me for a second. If we could sell the alternative assessment for this 1 year, everything's hunky dory. Harwich gets, we kick in another 525 or 507,000 is the difference. What happens the next year? How can we, what do we tell the Chatham voter and the Chatham parent about how we're going to address those very programmatic issues you just mentioned, Scott, for year 2? So say we could sell year 1. What are we going to sell in year 2? And how do we sell year 1 with the promise of what we're going to sell them in year 2? That's the issue for me. That's the issue. That's the issue. So yes, and you guys want me to recognize, or us to recognize, that there's a disparity. Yeah, there's a per pupil cost disparity between the 2 elementary schools, big time, because we haven't got enough kids. We know we haven't got enough kids. It's not anybody's fault. We don't have enough kids. And I don't want to revisit ancient history, Terry, but you know, we came together in the region for many, many good reasons, and one of which was Harwich needed a school desperately. And by coming together with Chatham, we saved the town of Harwich $38-something million, if I recollect. And yeah, we might have saved some money in the operating expenses thereafter, but Harwich saved a boatload that first year on building that school. Otherwise, they were going to spend, $100 million, some ungodly amount. So I don't want to revisit old history. We've had a great agreement. This has been a wonderful region. It's been a wonderful marriage so far. It has. And this perhaps is our first speed bump, and we'll get over it. But what we're saying, and is that yes, we recognize that there's a disparity, and there's no doubt, black and white. Not anybody's fault. We don't have enough kids. Okay, so what are we going to do about it? We're going to pay Howard's $525, and next year we're going to pay him $650, and next year we're going to pay him $850. Well, that's not. I don't think that's the answer. So I think the alternative assessment is a mechanism, but I don't think it's the answer. I mean, I've said enough. You guys have heard me all night. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And I see a bunch of hands going up. I just want to say, two things, and then I'm going to call on hands here. This has been said a few times tonight. We have a long-term solution. Exactly, Jeff. Absolutely. But we also have a short-term problem that needs addressing. And I'm just going to take a quick jump before I call on hands here, that the next item in our discussion, the school committee, we recognize, particularly from the Chatham side, that you're focused on the long-term solution. We absolutely understand that. And at the same time, we do understand Harwich's need to fix something in the short term. So the school committee has already made a commitment. March 4th will be our first community forum to hear from the public. It is our intention to have a series of community forums, listening sessions, public hearings. We have made that commitment. We had a good discussion about it 2 weeks ago at our meeting. So March 4th will be the first of those. So I just want to assure Chatham that we have heard you, and we are going to just move as quickly as we can to really have some of these public forums so that we can hear from the community. Because I agree with you, we do need a long-term solution, but I don't want the short term to get hidden, because Harwich, I have to say, as a Harwich school committee member, I do worry about one day that Harwich might turn down the budget, and then what? Then we start cutting into our programs. I mean, we're going to have to do something to balance numbers. So I don't want to put our schools into a position that we're ever having to look and cut programs or staff or anything else. And we are trying so very hard, the school committee, and that's why we're here tonight, because the school committee wanted to bring the two boards together to really have a good conversation. It's a great conversation, but there are two clearly different needs of short-term and long-term, and we do have to find a way to bring those together in some way. Ed, I saw your hand, and then Terry, go ahead.
Well, I understand Jeff's point, about if you do it this year, then what happens next year and the year after. But on the other hand, this year we'll be providing a $550,000 subsidy, and next year presumably a $650,000, and the year after that an $800,000, and then we're up over quite soon. We're up over $1 million a year in subsidy, and that if, you know, unless, up in, you know, my point of view, up until the time that Chatham's native pupils starts growing, it's going to be a continuing problem. And I don't really see, you know, a way around that.
Thank you, Ed. Terry, go ahead. And then
I just
Joe.
want to echo to Jeff. You may be right, Jeff, that year one, next year, $507,000, and then what's next, Terry? 572 the year after that. The year after that, I'm actually echoing Ed too. But I clearly know that's not the answer for Harwich. And Harwich has been giving that as an answer for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and 4 years. Fortunately, between this little conversation, our Harwich taxpayers, and this is my opinion, they don't know what we're talking. They don't know this. They don't know this. And if they did, as Dean said, you doubt that you could sell the idea of enhancing the money coming to the elementary school in order to keep the elementary school. The same holds true with Harwich. I could guarantee nothing that we could sell the past history of subsidizing a shrinking school in Chatham with no real short-term hope of bringing in your own children with the housing situation, which is a tough thing. And I fully agree with whatever plans you could do. But our Harwich citizens would look at us and say, you mean without anything in the document for 2 or 3 or 4 years, you've been subsidizing the kids over there for more money and you weren't able to work on that and get some parity? Right, yeah. So.
Thank you, Terry. Joe and then Michael.
Well, just to begin with a minor point, and it's only a minor point, but there isn't parity or equality on the school committee by town. We have 8 members with 6 votes. The Chatham folks have half a vote, and the Harwich team has a full vote. So in fact, the only time the regional agreement really talks about equity is in proportion relating to voting. I think we do have a problem with finances and money, and the change is going to have to come by changing a regional agreement. That's going to take time. We do know that there's a formula to fund the schools. There's no fixed amount of cost as to what that formula will be. There isn't, the concept of subsidizing isn't in our agreement. There isn't a cap on the amount of money one town pays vis-a-vis another. That's not there. That whole topic is absent. And we cannot legitimately try to reconfigure or rethink a regional agreement by adding on our present day concerns. So it's not okay in terms of the agreement to say, well, we're spending more, we're subsidizing you, etc. What we have is a formula. That formula is being followed. It's now being followed over time. Reality has changed to the disadvantage of the town of Harwich. And Harwich wants to trim its budget and looks to the schools as one way to do it. That strikes me as entirely reasonable. And I think we're going to have to consider looking at a way of changing the formula in the regional agreement. Now, that is provided for. That procedure is provided for. The regional agreement is not the 10 Commandments. There is a mechanism for change within it. While no particular problem was anticipated by the people who had the sense to put this agreement together, there was an anticipation clearly that some problem someday would come up and the formula or something in this would have to change. And there's a way to get input from the boards and from the town to make a change. And I think we need a financial change, partly because of the quality of education. Quality of education isn't simply an elementary matter. You go to elementary school, and then there's a middle school and an upper school or high school. And that's all part of one system. And that system has to be good from K to 12. You can't have, well, I mean, it's obvious, you can't have a good foundation of education unless it's system-wide. And to have a good system-wide education now means coming to terms with the problems that Harwich is contending with, and Chatham is going to have to make a change and pay a bigger cost. That's a hardship, folks. I've already been told by a few folks I'm not going to be reelected next year. You know, if we take on this burden that Harwich is talking about, well, you won't be reelected. You know, that's only a handful of people, and my answer is, well, we'll see. If you want a good system, if you want a good school system in Chatham, you have to be aligned to Harwich, and vice versa. Harwich is benefiting from being part of a district with us. By virtue of regionalization, we've increased the type of classes, the number of classes, the AP level classes. We've increased the extracurricular activities. Harwich benefits by this regionalization, as does Chatham. So let's keep it together. And the way to do it, I'm afraid, is going to be that Chatham has to bear more cost. Now, the next point in that, and I guess our select board must be very aware of it. We have a small parent population. The parents of Chatham want to keep an elementary school in Chatham. But does the majority of voters in Chatham who do not have children in the district, who will not have children in the district, Mr. McManus aside, the elderly are simply not going to reproduce. Do those people who do not have children in the district, the majority of the town, in other words, are they willing to pay more? And if so, how much more to educate other people's children? I'm a teacher of 40 years. I think putting money into educating other people's children is I'm going to go back into my Catholic roots here for a minute. I think it's a sacred responsibility. It's a simple covenant of the generations. It's our obligation to the next generation. But most people who are retired are not ex-teachers with that kind of commitment. So we in Chatham do have a problem we got to face, and that is we are facing a quarrel within our town between the people who want to maintain an elementary school, to pay the cost of maintaining an elementary school, and the people who are more concerned to pay less in taxes going forward. I'm in the difficult position of trying to convince my friends and neighbors that we in Chatham need to pay more for the necessity of maintaining a very good school system in the future, which requires, I'm afraid, a change, a big change in the regional agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Michael.
I just want to start by thanking everybody for all the thoughtful conversation and the working group for getting us to the point that they've gotten us to. Don Howell mentioned it. In Harwich, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Our voters are getting tired of paying too much money. And we cannot continue to pay 3% plus more a year and Chatham continue to pay 3% less a year. It just can't continue. And I think that the numbers do speak for themselves. I guess with that, I would ask Dr. Carpenter and thank the previous speaker for bringing it up. What's the mechanism for when the boards and the voters don't agree? Because I think going to Harwich town meeting, it's a no-brainer to say that we don't want to spend the extra $550,000 anymore. And for Chatham to go to their town meeting and say we're going to spend an extra $550 is going to be a tough sell. So what is the mechanism with the state for when you don't agree? Because I don't think that this should be something that comes back every year for reaffirmation. This needs to be a decision that we make and that we stand by the decision. And I think that the school committee kind of has laid the path on what would be fair and us paying for our own elementary school and Chatham paying for their own elementary school. And that seems to be what's being endorsed. I'm not sure that we're going to agree on that. So I'd like to understand what the next step is as we navigate through this.
All right, Scott, go ahead.
So, generally what happens is you end up in a situation where you don't have a budget, much the same way, that I think, the school district and municipalities were sort of operating under heading into the new fiscal year without potentially having a town meeting to set a budget. So in the case of regional school districts, without a budget, the commissioner weighs in and basically comes back and says, okay, well then this is your budget. And it's largely based on what your last budget was. And it ends up being a sizable hit to the Monomoy budget for next year, because as the budget stands, it's just shy of a 1% increase of a budget, but it would be a net reduction in the Monomoy budget, which then has me in a situation where we're reducing across the board in all of the schools. And and again, it's the challenge here is what can we do to maintain a strong program, not how do we slowly whittle our program that's strong away.
If I could follow up, Tina?
Yep, please.
Thank you for that, Scott. I would just ask that the Chatham board give some serious thought to the town of Harwich has been covering this difference for years. And we have gone back before our voters year after year and asked for money well above what we've budgeted for and kept this going. And it is not, I don't think anyone's fault right now that you do not have enough people to have an elementary school. We're fast approaching not having enough people. And we would ask that you look at what we have spent over the last few years and what our voters have stuck their necks out for. And going forward in this year's budget cycle, I've listened to them the last 2 years. They're getting dangerously close to not voting for it. And I think that our school committee's done a great job bringing this forward, that we should support that this year at very least, and then continue conversation about how we're going to merge the elementary schools or redistrict or change the grading. But for this year, we need to, sooner than later, send a message to our voters of where we're going to be. And I certainly support what the school committee's brought forward to get us there for this year.
Thank you, Michael. Any other comments? Nancy, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've been scribbling notes down, so hopefully they'll be sort of coherent. So when this was brought up initially by Dr. Carpenter, I mean, it's been a few years, but more seriously, I guess this fall, late summer, my initial opinion as a Chatham resident, Chatham taxpayer, was that's what the regional agreement says. So why would we want to change any of it? And then we started digging deeper into it and going back and remembering where the agreement came from, why we have it. I can't sit for this long, sorry. I get fidgety. And we have the agreement, it's been brought up before, but we have the agreement because Harwich needed a new high school and Chatham needed kids. And we need those kids to keep the sustainable system going forward at a reasonable cost. We passed, we're in a region, both towns have benefited dramatically. We have the beautiful Monomoy High School. Harwich paid a lot less money towards it. Chatham has the additional bodies now in the classrooms at the middle school and the high school. Our costs have gone down over the years. But now we're seeing those issues at the elementary school. So kind of no segue, but new topic. I've experienced pretty much every year a struggle with the budget, specifically with Harwich. And I also remember one really tough year it really sticks out in my mind that I had a Chatham board member actually say to me specifically, can't we just pay extra this year so that we don't have to cut? And at that time, the answer was no, we can't. That's not a possibility. And that's kind of where I'm looking at it from this situation right now. As a school committee, we're developing these forums to determine the future of the elementary schools, as Tina mentioned. And we want them to be maintained, and we know it's not going to be a quick solution. So going back and forth, when I'm on the school committee and I'm sitting at the table of the school committee and watching the little boxes and also sitting in person, I can't remember who's Chatham and Harwich. We're the regional school committee. You know, we all are out for the kids. You know, as Corey said a little while before, when we're looking at the elementary schools, we're looking at what's best for the kids. And right now, I want to look at what's best for the kids, K through 12, pre-K through 12. And at this time, I think it's just important that we need to be a good partner with each other. Chatham to Harwich, Harwich to Chatham. I don't know if there's a different way. I don't know if there's a better way to support each other, but at this point, we're kind of at a sticking point. So year after year, we've seen the minimum contribution formula shift, mostly impacts Harwich negatively because they have more kids and Chatham is losing more kids. And so, we saw the big change over one meeting to a next where the minimum contribution came up, and all of a sudden, our very reasonable budget increase for FY22, now all of a sudden is not so reasonable in the assessment to Harwich. At this point, I'm concerned. I'm concerned hearing the Harwich budget conversation that happened this past week and how that's going to come towards us to make our numbers more accessible to them. I also know that there are concerns as a Chatham taxpayer. I'm a Chatham taxpayer. I have concerns. Do I want to pay extra money when I don't have to? The regional agreement doesn't say we have to, so why would I want to? Then I also look at how are we possibly going to convince the taxpayers of Chatham that we have an agreement, so why would we want to pay more? So we look at Chatham Elementary is a special place. My kids both went through there. I went through there even though it was in a different building at the time. But so is Harwich Elementary, so is the middle school, and so is the high school. They're all special places, and they all deserve to continue to run what they're doing. They're thriving and growing. I said this before, and somebody else said it earlier, that this is a one-year Band-Aid. And we know and we expect and we're planning on trying to determine a way to research, explore, explain all of the possible elementary school options. I also know that it would not have been feasible for us to make a change to any sort of elementary school program for school year 21-22, next school year. When this came up, in order for us to have done that, we would have already had many forums, try to figure out a change, how to vote for us, how to vote for you guys, and then trying to get it out to change a regional agreement for that. We knew that's not going to be possible. Therefore, we looked to try to figure out some sort of disparity. We're planning on getting the parent inputs. So actually, Michael, you said something that I was in the middle of writing as you were saying it. I feel like we're coming to that point where neither town is going to want to pony up. You know, Harwich is going to realize and say, why are we paying that extra money? But we're also going to look at Chatham, and Chatham's going to say, why do we need to pay the extra money? So it's going to be to that point where we're going to have to convince our taxpayers and our voters what is best for the school district as a whole and how we're going to be good partners with each other to do what's best for the district as a whole. And I just want to say that in my mind, and I believe in everybody else's mind on our committee based on our conversations, this is not a permanent change to the regional agreement. It is my expectation that we will be coming back to you two boards, I'd say by early fall, maybe late summer even, with an option that doesn't have Chatham paying for Chatham Elementary, but instead has a solid educational plan for both elementary schools. The intention is not to get rid of one of the elementary schools. The intention is to figure out how we can get both elementary schools and have the best educational plan for them. That's for my votes for now. So thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Peter, go ahead. And you're on mute, Peter, if you go down to the left corner.
You know, sometimes I wish I had learned that. You know. Anyway, Scott, would you put up what our assessment would be for Chatham? It's not 500, is it? 500,000 when in the operating budget. Of course, it's
what it would be in the revise or the alternative or the actual.
What is it that we're going to have to go to town meeting with as far as our assessment?
Okay, so with the assessment as it is in the regional agreement currently, Chatham was at a 8,899,195, and it drops down to an 8,626,350. So it's a decrease of $272,000, whereas Harwich is increasing by 847,000. In the scenario where each town is doing an alternative assessment where the towns are paying for their own elementary schools costs, there's a $507,000 shift in position where Harwich's assessment increases by 340,000. Chatham's goes from the 8,899,195 to a 9,133,899. So Chatham ends up paying $234,000 more than the FY21 assessment, or a 2.64% increase.
Or did you need to see that visually? I mean, did that answer?
Okay. No, that's fine.
Oh,
Okay.
was I sharing the screen or not?
No.
Oh, sorry. I thought I was sharing the screen.
Sometimes it helps to see it visually.
So it's okay. So it's a $230,000 increase, and we had a decrease last year too. Okay.
Yes.
I'll wait.
Go ahead. Peter, are you finished or did you have a follow-up?
No.
Okay. Thank you. Dean, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I listened very carefully to Nancy and Joe, who are from Chatham, and I guess I had a question procedurally, Scott, first before I comment. If the proposed alternative assessment mechanism were to go forward, when would it happen? At the annual town meetings of the two towns this May? And would there be an immediate impact on the budget? Would you anticipate that the budget would be adopted at each of those towns the assessments would be adopted at each of those town meetings that would incorporate the results of the proposed assessment change? Is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about a subsequent vote?
Yeah, I guess there's a timing procedural challenge here. If the boards were to mutually support moving forward an alternative assessment, in speaking with legal counsel, not only do we have to have support of the two boards and the school committee on what that approach is going to be, but we also need to get support from the Department of Education. So we need to come up with some proposed change, send that to the Department of Education, and get the commissioners, lawyers, the legal team first to look at it, and the commissioner to sign off on it. It's doubtful that all of that can happen before our spring town meetings. So the proposal or the recommended approach would be that that we would vote the assessment, or that we would present the budget and have the town meetings vote the assessment as it would be under the statutory method in the current regional agreement, and then have special town meetings in the fall to amend the regional agreement that would allow for an alternative assessment, and if that were to then pass, then to adopt a alternative budget for FY22. You know, so that wouldn't happen till a fall special town meeting.
So the fiscal fix doesn't take place until at the earliest in the fall. Do you have to go to the state first before it's presented to the town meetings? Is that what your council is telling you?
Yeah, I think the awkwardness would be for us to go through everything and take wording and have the taxpayers, the voters, approve something at town meeting, and then have the state say, no, that doesn't work for us.
Yeah. Well, forgive me if my internet connection is very unstable. I'm getting notices, alerts every so often. You know, in Chatham, we've had a lot of sort of tangential conversation about the future of the elementary school, but we haven't had a formal meeting of the select board where that has been the theme for the evening. Under Shireen, we've had a number of thematic meetings devoted to individual topics, and they've been very successful. And we had a really good one back in, I think it was March or so, or April, when we were considering what to do about reopening the town in the COVID era. And we had phenomenal participation from our citizens, including many who were part-time residents. Joe raised an interesting point about what is the level of commitment among the taxpayers of Chatham to keeping the elementary school outside of the parent community. I guess I wanted to just throw out to the members of my board whether there might be some interest in having a select board meeting that is devoted solely to the idea of this proposal that the town of Harwich and the school committee is asking us to consider. And of course, I think we're going to have to include in that discussion what the plan is for the future of the elementary school. Because I'd like to get some greater feel for what my constituents think about these issues. And Peter's question is, and the answer that Scott gave is very interesting, because we're talking for this particular fiscal year that we're planning of $234,000, which isn't a whole lot of money. You know, we were throwing around about the last issues that I don't think that we're discussing tonight. So I just really want to throw that out and suggest that. I don't know if there's any interest among the other Chatham board members, but I certainly would be willing to have a dedicated meeting to that topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. So Jeff, Peter, go ahead. Jeff, Peter, Corey. I guess, do you need to talk amongst yourselves here? So Jeff?
No, I think that meeting was they've been very successful. Those one issue meetings have been very successful. We've solicited very widespread feedback, and I think it's an excellent idea. We've had one for affordable housing, one for the reopening of the town, et cetera, et cetera. I want to take a little different tack. I think that's a good idea, and that we should do that. But if we were a board this evening that was allowed, if we were a formal board that was allowed to have a motion, if we would formulate a motion this evening, and the motion would address an alternative assessment, but I would hope that the motion would include in that alternative assessment some language that says the school committee, the regional school committee and the towns will work toward a viable solution towards having excellent programming at both elementary schools for blah, blah, blah. Uh, It's not necessarily the $234,000. It's the increment between where we were and, where we're going. And it's a $507,000 increment, which is about double that. So it's a bigger number that in actuality is what we're talking about. But if we were to craft a motion, what would that motion read like? So that if we come up with an agreement on alternative assessment, there's also language that addresses the concerns of the select board and others in town about the future of the elementary school. I think if we could possibly craft that, I think that would be helpful. Thank you. Or
Thank you,
we have to do it tonight. We have to do it tonight, but we need that type of approach, I think. It would be helpful for us, or for me at least. I don't know about the rest of the board. Be helpful for me.
Thank you, Jeff. And then I saw Peter, Corey, and then Terry. So Peter, go ahead.
Thank you. My comment, I agree with Dean as far as having a meeting. I was thinking about something along those lines. Of course, puts a little more onus on our chair plus the rest of us, but she does a wonderful job with that. My thinking as I've been listening, and I've been listening pretty carefully, and I understand and I feel for Harwich, and it's been bothering me for the last couple of years. I see that every few years, we come down to 1% or 2%, and between Joe and Michael, the problem is a problem for both our towns with decreasing enrollment. But the main problem is Chatham. We're losing more. We're the problem. So we should try and fix it as best we can. Nobody wants to pay more money, but we haven't been paying it over a long period of time. I agree. We need to understand what our constituents want and what they think, what they'd like to have. And I think it's going to be an interesting time. And I agree with Jeff. It was my concern. This is a Band-Aid, but what's the greatest incentive around? You put money on the table and more is going to be out there that you're going to have to pay. So let's get a deal done. Let's get something done properly so we can move ahead. And I didn't think this when I walked into this meeting. If we don't have some money and skin in the game, right, we'll kick this can another year. And I don't say we, I'm saying we collectively as maybe a town. So I think that one, we should have the meeting in Chatham. We should have an open discussion about it, and there has to be an understanding that we could go right down the road, and I could see it within another year that we're going to be Dennis Yarmouth, and that would be terrible. I don't want to see that kind of. It was lasted for I don't know how many years, and they were suing each other, and I wasn't even involved with that. But all I was in the papers, and it didn't help any of the Dennis Yarmouth students or Dennis, yeah. So anyway, that's my thoughts, and I think that we should move ahead with that, and I agree we should have language that says we're going to get something done in a year. Period. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Peter. Corey, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Two comments. One, as far as Dean's question about having a topic focused meeting, absolutely. No objections to that at all. But what I wanted to comment was on Scott's response on the timing of the issue. That clarity was very much appreciated, that the fact that we're looking at more of a fall special town meeting to address this. So on an optimistic perspective, it's more palatable for me to look at the alternative assessment, because you could do the both short-term discussion in the fall, dealing with that element, but it will give you an ample amount of time to really dig into the long-term discussion. What is the long-term, status of our elementary school between now and the fall, so that when you go to, I hate to say, sell these short-term elements, you can answer and respond, well, this is what we're doing short-term, but our long-term response is going to be X, Y, and Z. And you've had a lot of public forums and discussions between the communities and the parents and all the stakeholders that you can bring to that meeting to address the, the alternative assessment. But you also have some answers in your hand for the long-term answers. So that's just my thoughts.
Thank you. Terry?
Hopefully my final comments. I thought Peter's comment was right on the money. A lot is at stake here, and we've had so much success in the past 8 or 9 years. So there's a lot of motivation to get this thing to work. I think there is recognition. How we solve it. I keep going back to the word of parity and what I came out of in Barnstable, that it was always, and even our middle school and our high school, a mix of kids. Into the dollar, the per pupil cost is the same. Now we have an inequity. I don't have a motion, but here's my thought. Harwich has been picking up that subsidy to make this thing work, known or unbeknown to a lot of people. Now it comes to a point where maybe we recognize it. If the Chatham Elementary School's numbers were healthy right now, the issue of what future plan to make it a great elementary school greater wouldn't even be on the table. For example, Harwich Elementary has 525 kids. I would assume we have an excellent principal and staff, and they're happy with their plan. So Harwich, the school committee represents, are more than willing to enter into a discussion about two-level movement of buses, all for the hope that we could resolve a Chatham demographic issue with kids. Now that's something to be said, because whatever solution we come up with, absent Chatham having flocks of kids coming in, which isn't going to happen, will need the assistance of some portion of those 500 K through 4 kids over at Harwich. There'll be movement. Who's going to fill those seats? What a sacrifice that's going to be for Harwich to sell. However, so I think that's a step in the right direction amongst the 8 of us on the committee already, that I think we're, as individual representatives, willing to dive into that and say, that's part of the solution. We can work that out if it has to be. Not necessarily the 2 levels. That has some pluses. It doesn't really resolve, as Scott said, the parity issue. But, I just think there is an answer to this where we're maybe short-term, balancing it off, and then moving towards something that makes it more permanent.
Thank you, Terry. Anybody else? I know it's getting late. Sharon?
Yes, just briefly, I don't want to forget that we went into this together, and truthfully, the Monomoy schools has turned out to be a lot better than I expected them to be. And I think in general, people are very happy with that. I don't want to forget that. I see the one sticking point is only one word, and it's money. The programs are great. Whatever kind of solutions we have, I think, at least for Harwich, it's just going to come down to the money. And so I appreciate what Peter said about, looking at this and what everyone else said. I think this was a great forum. I don't think that you'll be seeing too many people from Harwich go to Chatham. I might be wrong. So by having these in the different towns, we may be having one view in one spot, a different view in another spot, and also the view from a lot of them are not going to be considering the money, and the taxpayers that pay the bills, the other people that don't have the children. That's a factor that I'm not, I might be surprised, because maybe those people are going to come to these forums. I think the people that are going to be the most invested are the ones with children. So anyway, we can see what happens, but this was wonderful. I love seeing a whole bunch of you.
Sharon, we lost. Oh, there you go. Larry, go ahead.
Yeah, it's past my bedtime too, Sharon, so I'm ready to go. Just a quick reminder that we've talked short-term and long-term. For us, short-term is our Maytown meeting, because that's when the discussion will come up. You know, there's been some discussion whether short-terms fall, but that's our next critical timeline.
Thank you, Larry. Ed, go ahead.
Yeah, just a few comments because I don't often get this chance since I was so heavily involved in the with the building committee. That was probably one of the truly remarkable experiences I've had. Monomoy High School was the third school that I built as a public official, and it was probably, I think, the most successful along the way. And working with David and Nancy, who I haven't seen in many, many, many months, I want to thank you for your work on it. And you know, it built in me anyway a commitment to continue working with the school. I continue on at Monomoy High School as the advisor of the Key Club, which is an absolute joy to be involved with the students. And that's what all of this discussion is really about, is ensuring the best for our students.
Thank you, Ed. Any other comments? All right, so we've been together for 2.5 hours tonight. We do have a potential vote. I feel, and I'm just going to speak on behalf of the school committee, I feel like we've done our job to bring this issue to the table. And I'm hearing everything from Chatham and Harwich. And we have two things on the table. We have a short-term problem and a long-term problem. So Chatham, we recognize the long-term concerns that you have regarding the elementary school. The school committee intends to do our part in hearing from the public. We've already started to have some conversations about it. Like I said, our first one is scheduled for March 4th. And to us, this long-term solution is not something we can settle tonight. It's really important that we hear from people. The short-term issue, as I understand it, and as the school committee understands it, is Harwich needs some help here. So, and we can't do it. I mean, we can't take care of this. So our intention tonight was to bring both boards together. I think we've made it real clear where we stand here as far as supporting the short term and the long term. Now it's up to you. And I don't know really what your intentions are at this point after hearing 2.5 hours. And Ed, I see your hand, but this is up to you. Go ahead, Ed.
If I could actually recommend, I know that your working group is still, has been still meeting. If we could ask them to prepare a motion that takes into account some action on both the short term and the long term, and prepare language for that, and then refer it to the three bodies. We could take it up at our next appropriate meeting.
When you say the long term, what are you looking for, Ed, with the long term?
Well, some, you know, the motion would include some commitment to activities to work on developing a process to determine what the sort of long-term solutions or changes may be as part of it, and then a commitment to some action on the short-term issue.
Okay, that's
in a single motion.
okay. And a single motion. So let me just get some clarity around because we're three different boards. So if, let's just say the work group comes up with a motion, are you asking for us to come back as a joint board? Or are you asking for the motion to go to each individual board? I just want to make sure I'm understanding your proposal.
Well, I think it would have to come to each of us individually, whether we are meeting in joint session or not. I mean, we'd each have to take our individual actions. So if you come up with a motion and you think that it may need to be presented at a joint session, with some additional debate, then I think we'd need to have another joint session meeting. If you feel that you could come up with an acceptable motion for all three boards to take up individually to pass on, then we may not have to do that.
Okay. Michael, go ahead.
Jeff Dykins mentioned this, and I think you actually have what you were thinking as a motion already drafted.
The motion that I read in the very beginning was really about the school committee coming together to pull this meeting together. So we are, as a school committee, don't have a motion, but I see Nancy's hand. Go ahead, Nancy.
So I think what ultimately needs to happen is we are looking, and we haven't voted on this yet. We voted on the motion that Tina mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. But ultimately, what we need to do is, as a school committee and as each board of selectmen and select board, is the potential change to the regional agreement. So the whole conversation, and maybe I'm misspeaking, but the whole conversation is around a potential amendment or change to the regional agreement that would need to be voted on by the three of us and then go to the town meetings after it goes through the DESE and gets their blessing. And that's the town meeting. So in addition to that, we could also have, we draft a motion where all three of us recognize that there's going to be changes to the elementary schools and we want to encourage that sooner than later. But I think ultimately the legal obligation starts with the regional agreement.
Okay, thank you. Shireen.
So my obligation and my board's obligation is to our residents and taxpayers of Chatham. So any motion that you're going to be making tonight, I'm not going to recommend that we take a vote on it. We'd want to bring it back to our at one of our board meetings to discuss it and vet it out with our community members. That's exactly what we talked about, having a community forum. And I wouldn't want to be making an arbitrary, it wouldn't be arbitrary, but I wouldn't want to be making this decision without feedback from our residents and taxpayers.
Okay, thank you, Shireen. Michael?
I guess I would just ask Larry then if we could put this on our next meeting. I don't think that this motion for Harwich anyway is a very detailed conversation going forward. It's a pretty simple ask, and I would just ask that as we make the motion that we take what Jeff Dykins said and put some language in there that we are going to work towards a permanent solution. Or a long-term solution. So whatever the motion is, the first part of it's simple, taking an alternative approach, and then the second part of it would be a commitment by all of us to work on a long-term solution. So Larry, I don't see the need for us to kick this can down the road very much longer. I would ask that we do it sooner rather than later. And obviously I'd be prepared to do it tonight, but if you want to wait till the next meeting, that's fine.
No, I would like to wait because I think we need to, there are two separate motions in my mind. One is the motions for each town to look at the short term, and the longer term may be a joint, more of a joint motion from the two towns. But it's a good point to put it on the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Nancy, did I see your hand?
Did, but I'm not really sure what I was going to say. I'm actually thinking that so after having this meeting and getting what could be considered a consensus that both boards and our committee are willing to move in some sort of potential direction towards an assessment change. And so if I was actually surprised that there was a potential vote for tonight's meeting. And I think that was put on there as a just in case, but I wouldn't have anticipated voting on that change this evening. I feel like we need to bring that language back to the school committee and have that conversation at a school committee meeting where we approve that language as a school committee and then bring it to the boards and then the select board and the board of selectmen. Can I just say the boards of selectmen? they would then do their due diligence through their meetings to approve the agreement change before it goes to town meeting. That's just kind of what I picture in my head. And then again, in addition to that, the conversation of some sort of mutual agreement between the three of us where we're going to push forward the conversation of the elementary schools more seriously ASAP.
Okay, thank you. Terry.
As a thought, in the chair of the Chatham committee, I agree with. I don't think right now the school committee had a unanimous vote that we would pursue improvement steps in the two elementary schools, i.e. Chatham Elementary School. We've already committed to that in an 8-0 vote. That was 2 weeks ago. I say we pursue that. I don't see any other motion that we need to take. In the short term, I think the ball, after this 2 hours of healthy conversation, is in the Chatham Select Board's court. They need to think this over, meet as a committee, and decide short term, we can do A or B. We can do this and signal us if they want to make a motion of it or a phone call to their town manager and to Larry, the select board chair here, regarding the short term. Therefore, I don't know. I think the working group has gone as far as they could, and I don't think any computer-assisted 12-member re-meet to come up with a motion, which is fairly simple. One, we are going to commit to assisting and helping the Chatham Elementary demographics by creating a plan that would make it a healthier school. Number one or two. Number one, short term, we need to see some parity regarding that per pupil cost. The cost would have to come out of Chatham. Chatham needs to meet privately, consider this as, does it make sense or it doesn't? So that would be my suggestion. So I think,
Okay, thank you, Terry. Any other final comments? All right, so I think the consensus is there's not a vote, and that was there as a placeholder, because you never know where a conversation like this might lead, and so it's always there as a placeholder. But hearing the consensus that there will be no vote tonight, but each board of selectmen and the select board will take this back to your own boards for further dialogue amongst yourselves. So I think we've come at least to the end of our dialogue this evening, unless anybody else has some final comments or thoughts. All right, I thank you. Before we adjourn, and we'll have to do it by our boards, but I just want to thank everybody for their time and recognizing, we have two issues here, and I'll just want to close by saying Harwich is seeking financial equity, and that's the short term. And then Chatham really does need to know where we're moving in the long term, especially with the elementary school. So I just want to make sure that is said a million times and with those two scenarios. So with that being said, we will adjourn, but we will do it individually. So I'll start with Chatham. So if you want to adjourn your board, and then Larry, you adjourn yours, and then I will adjourn mine. So go ahead, Shireen.
Thank you, Tina. I do want to say I appreciate the relationship we have with Harwich and in this regional relationship. And we all are here for the best for our children in our town. So just want to end that on a positive note. I'm going to accept a motion to adjourn from my board.
So moved, Peter.
Second?
Second.
Okay, I'll take a roll. Peter?
Aye.
Corey?
Aye.
Dean?
Aye.
Jeff?
Aye.
And chair says aye. So we have adjourned our meeting.
Thank
Good
you.
night, all.
Actually, Larry, Terry, don't go anywhere. We haven't adjourned us yet. Hold on. Larry, go ahead and adjourn your board, please.
Thank you, Tina. And I would echo Shireen's comment that very much appreciate working together. We all have lived through the Cape and Dennis and Yarmouth, and so we don't want to head there at all. And so we appreciate this. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move we adjourn.
To second.
Second.
I'll go with roll call. Don?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
Ed?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. So we're adjourned.
Thank you. And now the school committee, and again, thank you everybody for your time tonight. Wonderful conversation. It's a pleasure to work with both towns. Really enjoy getting to know everybody, actually. And I will entertain a motion from the school committee to adjourn.
So moved.
All right, sound like all right, so Joanne has made the motion. Nancy has seconded. We'll do a roll call starting with Nancy.
Aye.
Meredith,
Aye.
thank you. Joe,
Joe Osceola, aye.
Joanne, thank you.
Aye.
Jackie,
Aye.
and am I missing, did I grab everybody? Oh, Sharon, sorry, Sharon,
Aye.
thank you. And I am an aye, so the school. committee-
Terry's an
Oh,
aye
Terry.
also.
Terry, thank you. You moved
Kudo,
around.
Chairwoman,
Oh, there you
excellent
are.
job. Excellent
Oh,
job
thank you.
moderating this tonight.
Thank you very much, Terry. And Terry has moved, and the chair says aye, so the school committee is officially adjourned, and the meeting is officially adjourned at 9:14.
Good
Thank
evening.
you all.